Crash Bandicoot is pretty much my childhood. I remember so distinctly having the PlayStation 1, turning it on and hearing that infamous opening sound before the game would start. And Crash was easily one of my favourite games on the console. However, something I didn't know for the longest time, which I thought was genuinely really interesting, was that Sony, the company that had made the PlayStation, when they looked at the game Crash Bandicoot, they had no idea how that game ran on their console. They thought it must have been some sort of witchcraft. But we are going to explore that all today. Hello! Welcome to Brain Spill, the laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and Sony themselves had no idea how the game ran on the PlayStation console. They didn't, but the developers of the game, Crash Bandicoot, did. And the reason they knew was because they'd taken some sneaky workarounds to try and make this work. Some would call it underhanded, others would call it absolutely genius, but either way, it managed to work. Naughty Dog developed and released Crash Bandicoot for the original PlayStation in September 1996, with this not only being Sony's first venture into the gaming market, but they would soon have their own unofficial mascot for the game's console, becoming an icon of the gaming sphere and be ultimately a smash hit. This 3D platformer was a change from the original perspective the team were going for, being a 2D side-scroller, to then fix the camera behind Crash Bandicoot for the majority of the game. The company Polygon actually reached out to pretty much every single member of the Crash Bandicoot development team who made the original game, in order to get their insight into how the game came to be. And for those of you that are interested, I will leave a link to the article in the description. It is very interesting to read, but the one we're going to be talking about mainly today are the comments that were made by the programmers of the game. Because that is not only the most interesting, but from what they say, it's quite compelling that they actually managed to pull this game off. The man we have to pay particular attention to is the co-founder of Naughty Dog, Andy Gavin, and the programmer Dave Baggett, who explain how their programming managed to bemuse Sony, so much in fact that Sony thought that if the game was shipped out with their consoles, the CD would literally break people's PlayStations. So basically, Sony thought that this game was so powerful that their console couldn't handle it, which in most circumstances they were probably correct, but Naughty Dog had managed to make it work, and they needed to go above and beyond to be able to prove to Sony that yes, their game actually did work, and no, the game would not break your PlayStation, as far as they were aware. There's tons of space on the disc, and in most cases they didn't even use it because there's just not enough memory. It would get 2 megs of RAM, so I had this idea about how you could use virtual memory to basically allow much bigger levels. Like, Crash levels ended up being 32 to 40 megs, usually. But the machine's memory was only 2. Almost everyone else's games had to fit their levels into whatever your working memory was, like maybe a meg. Okay, so what Andy Gavin was doing basically was he was experimenting with the game The Way of the Warrior, and he was confident that the machine could read the disc quickly enough to be loaded into the console's memory and onto the background of the game. So when Crash Bandicoot played, it loaded 3 64K chunks, meaning that all they needed to do was make sure the disc could be read at this speed to match what the console was capable of. So what they then did was they just had to make sure that the disc could be read from multiple locations on the disc in order to be able to read the disc quickly enough. Which is why it sounds like the console is about to take off on an aircraft carrier, because of the fact it's reading data so quickly. So yes, whilst they were making the console push itself to its very limits, they were able to show that it was capable of doing this, and even showing Sony something that they didn't even know was possible. Sony, whilst impressed by all this, they were still understandably concerned how it all worked. How did Naughty Dog manage to pull this off? And was there going to be any irreparable harm later down the line because of the high performance that they were making the console go through? So they started to do some more digging. The reason for this was that Sony had never really seen a game like this run to this capacity on their consoles. So they decided to pull out their diagnostic tools and probe a bit further. Once Sony decided that they were going to publish it, they started really studying it, and they had this analyzer tool, which is like a hardware-based analyzer where they could sort of probe the PlayStation as it was running and see what the game was doing. The first thing that totally freaked them out was this idea that the game was constantly reading from the CD at 300 kilobytes a second, because their models of how long the CD drive would last were based on occasional access, not constant access. They were very worried that if they shipped this game, all the PlayStations in the world would break because their CD drives would melt. Yes, so basically once they ran these analyzer tools, they had many questions for Naughty Dog. I think it was Kelly Flock, who was one of the heads of Sony, was like, "You're doing what with the CD?" He's like, "This is only rated for like 400,000 reads." I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of what we do if you were like, I calculated it out. If you're playing for like 3 weeks, which isn't that long, you know?" Dave Beggett, one of the programmers at Naughty Dog, did go on to state that he believed the estimates given by Sony were actually quite conservative, which you'd think that maybe he was right because throughout the development of the game they must have seemingly had little to no meltdowns. Otherwise they probably would have not decided to show this to Sony in the first place. He did go on to comment that there was something else they did under the surface which may have explained the improved performance and the fact that they kind of went behind Sony's back when it came to their rules on developing games for consoles. The only thing that we did that was sort of cheating was when we first started, and there were many years where this was true, at least until '97, the official line from Sony was you have to use these APIs to do the graphics. So they would give you this C library to draw polygons and things like that, and they said, if you don't do that, you're going to be banned. We won't release your game. We're like, no, we're not going to do that. We don't care if you say you're not supposed to, we're just going to ignore that because it's stupid. It's just a dumb thing to do. So, what did Naughty Dog decide to do instead? Well, they thought it would be more efficient and better to, instead of using the tools and code that Sony had provided them, to just write their own code instead, which clearly worked wonders for them. So with these minor changes, they were able to get the most out of this console, freaking Sony out in the process and making them wonder what the hell must have been going on. And yes, if I was Sony, I would also be somewhat suspicious about what the hell was going on with this console and why it's not melted due to the fact that this game is able to read so quickly. But Crash Bandicoot, upon release, as far as I'm aware, didn't cause a mass melting of consoles and was incredibly successful. So I'm sure that even if Sony did find out the real goings on with what Naughty Dog did behind the scenes, they probably wouldn't care too much now, given that at the time they made quite a bit of money, because that's just the way it goes. If you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to be notified as soon as I upload my next video, be sure to hit the bell button. And if you've got any ideas for what topics you'd like me to discuss next, let me know down in the comments below. As always, sources used in the video will be in the description. So yeah, rule of thumb if you're ever developing a game for a console, best thing to do is look at the rules and then ignore them and then do your own thing. I mean, it totally worked for Naughty Dog, so I don't know if it would work for you too, but you know what? There's always hope to give it a try. You know, provided it doesn't cause a complete nuclear meltdown or anything like that. But aside from that, the world's your oyster. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.